Hello everyone, it's Erin, and today I'll be replicating this piece of concept art from Sleeping Beauty made by Eyvind Earle, celebrating 2025. It's here, and so is my gouache. There it goes. It's not here anymore. There are my brushes, flathead, roundhead. I've got paper towel, I've got a wax palette, and I have my gouache. Let's do this. So we're going to start with a background color, and the background color is pink, a lovely pink. It gradiates. There's a gradient that goes from the sun to the background, to the sky, and this gradient's pretty easy to do actually. So I'm going to talk you through it. I'm holding your hand. We're going to do this gradient together. It's going to be romantic. It's going to be fun, full of love, as gradients should be. So the pink that I'm doing it's slightly diminished. There's like a grayness to it. And I've noticed that almost all of Eyvind's colors do have a gray mixed in with them to diminish them. So there's this lovely cohesion throughout the whole look of his concept art, especially for Sleeping Beauty. And he was in charge of all the backgrounds. So yeah, his colors definitely have this gray quality to them. So I mixed black and white together first, magenta, a little bit of true red. And then I'm making the two shades of orange that will be gradiating out from the center where the sun is out into the sky. So the first one here is slightly more yellow, and then I've got an orange that is slightly more red. So I've got three. And you want to work quickly when you're doing a gradient. The pink that I end up doing is a little bit darker than the original piece, but oh, excuse me, but it's cool. It works. So putting this on with my flathead, I could have used a larger flathead, would probably have been a wiser choice, but it's cool. It's all cool. That's what I say about everything that actually isn't. What is cool? Cool sucks. I'd rather be warm than cool, which is a t-shirt idea that I have. What do you think? Good t-shirt, right? So we're gradiating out from the center, that orange color, out to the pink, making sure that you're working wet on wet. But it's really about the second coat. The first coat can be kind of a throwaway coat. It's almost like a practice coat in this case. So putting in the pink first, and then while it's still wet, gradiating around that edge where it's wet, using a nice amount of pressure so that the two colors blend together, and then going for that darker orange in the center. Now, my circle that I've done here, this orange area should be a little bit higher up so that the sun lands right in the center of it, but it's fine. It's not a big deal, but I did notice that later that it probably could have been higher on the canvas. But now we're going to do the ground, the floor. And the floor is a gray cyan, so a very diminished, deep cyan. It appears to be just, like a dark gray, but it's got this cyan tint to it, or hue, that really adds to the sense of shadow, right? That it's this shadowed area. And it does work so beautifully with that pink sky as well. So mixing together black and white, starting with the gray, and then mixing in cyan and just a little bit of ultramarine, which is the warm blue. Cyan is the cool blue. And this floor, all of the gray blue in this entire piece is leaning towards the cooler blue, but it's not 100% cyan. There is a little bit of warmth to it. So I do mix a tiny bit of ultramarine in there with that. So this piece, look at that. She's so triumphant. She's stoked. It's the end of 2024, which was a great year for me. Last year I did a similar piece for New Year's of Maleficent looking out towards the sunset, and it was a lot more somber and sort of moody because 2023 was a very challenging year for me. But this year has been amazing. Like, some really amazing things have happened. I had a solo art show. I had my 50th birthday, which was super fun, a big pool party. It was basically 3 days of partying with people that I really love. And I've met a lot of great people this year. There's been so much, new, exciting things happening, and so much love. And so I thought this piece would reflect that, because she's she's owning it. She's stoked. She's doing evil magic, which isn't a good thing. But anyway, so now we're working on the wall. that is slightly lighter than the floor. So I added some white and just a little bit more cyan just to give it a little more punch of color, and using the side of my flathead brush here to make that thinner line. But this was, this is a little tricky to get a nice straight line. So to sort of even things out, I flip my canvas around. And this is something, it seems like a no-brainer, but I feel like it's worth mentioning that it's always great to like just move your canvas around, make it easier on yourself. This is another great trick. One of my students through YouTube here, Jillian, she showed me, like, if you put your brush in front of your hand, you can see the tip of the brush very clearly. It's a great trick to use if you're out buying brushes. But I did that with these two brushes to see which tip was flatter, because I knew that this stonework here, if I used a really fine tip, it would take longer. It wouldn't have the same ease of mark, I guess, of like brush strokes. So I'm using one that has like a flatter tip. And there we go. And then I'm now sort of figuring out where those towers are going to be off in the distance and bringing them in as well. So this is a smaller brush, but because it has a flatter tip, it's actually better to use my number 6 brush. I think this one's a number 2, but my number 6 brush is better because it has a finer tip. So for doing like detailed work, and I'll talk more about that later, but this brush is good for these kind of details where I don't need a fine tip. We all know how I feel about the tip. Do we know? Do I need to mention? No, I don't. Okay. So now I did a little bit of a mistake here. I decided that it was going to be exactly like that first tower, but no, it's not. If I was paying more attention, I would have noticed that, oh yeah, it's slightly different shape. So I just fixed that. And it's time to do the highlights. So the highlights in this piece, this is like a lot of pieces that I do on this channel. This piece has a lot of drama that's really emphasized through the use of light and shadow. And since this is, the sun is setting, it could be rising, but we're going to say it's setting. We're going to say the sun is setting on 2024. Or maybe we should say that the sun is rising on 2025. That feels good. That's like, yay, new year. Okay. Anyway, the highlights here are, adding to that sense of light and shadow, and also helping with the perspective of the stonework here. And as always with concept art, I go quickly. I'm not super precious about what I'm doing. I'm just getting things in there. I could be a little more intentional. I do think that this piece deserved a little more focus. But I've noticed something about myself over the years is that when things need more focus, like when I should be focusing on details, like the floor work that I'm going to do soon, the checkered floor, I tend to rush things. I'm almost like, if I just go fast with this and I screw it up, then it's not my fault. Like, I guess, I don't know, I get a little nervous and then I rush it if it's something that should have more attention. So I'm aware of this. This is something I will work on. But anyway, it is fun to go quickly. It is fun to just kind of loosen up and let go a little bit and not be so precious. And I think, in the case of these pieces, the artists were going quickly. I mean, Eyvind would pump out dozens and dozens of these every week. I forgot to record, or I thought I was recording myself doing the inside of the castle, those archways, but I didn't. So just imagine me painting them. I started small and worked and got bigger as I went so that I could sort of perfect, or not perfect, but get the symmetry between the two arches. And yeah, so it's a good idea is to start small. And then this orange is just white, red, and yellow. And then adding these highlights, this yellow, there's white added to it so that it's more opaque. And I've mentioned before that yellow is very transparent, so you want to add a little bit of white so that it's less transparent and brighter. And yeah, I mean, look at this. It's so brilliant the way these colors just add this sense of like, wow, like there's this really bright sunlight streaming into the castle. I should mention before I forget that I'm hosting a paint night on the 16th of January. It's going to be a 3-hour class. It'll be a lot of fun. We're going to replicate a very simple piece of concept art made by Mary Blair for Cinderella. And you don't need a lot of paint, like very few supplies. It's only $25. If you're interested, check out the link in the description below for all the information. And a few people have already signed up. It'll be a great time. Oh, and I should add, if you do sign up for it, then you get $25 off of your choice of any course or class throughout 2025. Yay. Just doing these little cutouts in the wall, in the arches. And remember, important gouache thing to remember is that you want things to dry completely before you do another coat if you're not blending. And so I had to wait till those little pink areas. I love a wet pink area, but I had to wait until they dried completely so that I could do a few more coats. And then, it's nice and opaque. And then we're bringing in a little bit of yellow for the highlights. Mwah, voila. And check this out. I finally picked up some artist sponges instead of using like a kitchen sponge. So much better. And this is the first time I've ever really used a sponge while painting, which is weird. I can't believe I didn't do it sooner, but you can see in the original piece, this really lovely speckled effect, this textured effect. And I'm realizing, my sponge is way too big. So I rip it. But what I would suggest, and what I'll do in the future, is I'll actually cut up the sponge into a few pieces that are smaller even. And then that way I can alternate between textures, because in this case, the texture is sort of repeating and it's pretty consistent, whereas you want more variation. So this was a great learning exercise for me, like how to use the sponge. And it's great. Like, I'm so glad I bought these. They were not very expensive, and it was a pack that came with several sponges to get different types of textures. And now I'm just mixing up this sort of cyan gray because I forgot to do one of the details on the arches. So typically you really want to mix enough gouache to do a whole section, but when I was doing the arches, it was much easier to do the arch in one smooth stroke, like going up and then around, instead of stopping to do these little details. And so doing them after did make more sense. And the color is almost the same, and it doesn't matter that it's not exactly the same, because once you get the black details over top, like the lines of the stonework, but also we're going to be bringing in those thorny rose bushes. And so that really draws the eye away from any mismatched colors there. They're close enough. So doing these roofs, I started with the centerpiece, and there's I think they're called a spire, the thing that's sticking up out of the top of the roof. And so I did that first, and then kind of built the triangle around it, which I think was a good strategy, actually. Now I'm looking, as I'm watching myself paint this, I can see, it's a little crooked and a little larger than it is in the original piece. But this is a strategy that I will use in the future, is starting with that center line and then building the two sections of the triangle on either side, rotating my canvas as needed. And I think, it's pretty good. Worked out okay. And the second one. So you can see here I'm doing these little tiny strokes. I've talked about this before. This is, I think, one of the easier ways to make a straight line is pulling the line towards you. So I've got my canvas upside down, so I'm pulling that line towards me, and I'm doing small strokes. And then I rushed this line that I just did, and you can actually see it's kind of curved. So slowing down a little bit and and then doing those small strokes really does help. There we go. So I'm using the same colors I used for the roofs. This is a very dark gray, but it's not black, for the trees. And I love Eyvind trees. Don't we love Eyvind trees? I mean, they're so beautiful. They're so stylized and lovely brush strokes. And there's something just so exquisite about his trees. I mean, isn't that what he's sort of known for, his trees and his amazing colors. And anyway, so here I am doing these trees, and this is where I'm going to, for the maybe one of the first times on this channel, I'm going to say, I love this brush. I am so happy with this purchase. This brush was cheap. I'll put the name of the brand in the description, but I bought it last week on sale, and it is perfect. It's not a real sable brush. It's Sablite, so it's like fake sable, but it's a number 6 with a very pointy tip. And what's fantastic about this kind of brush is that it holds a lot of paint, so I didn't have to go back and reload my brush over and over again. I can do a whole tree with just one brush load of paint, and if I press a little bit harder, I get like a thicker line, and then if I ease up on the pressure, I get this super fine tip, and there's a lot of control, and it's just, I loved it. I loved using this brush. So I don't know how long it'll last me, but I'm going to treat it good. I'm going to treat my baby brush better than I've treated other brushes. That's my promise. That's one of my resolutions, is I'm going to treat my babies better this year. So this tree, looking great. Now, here's the thing. I used the gray, the same gray as on the roofs. Eyvind chose to do these trees in gray, I'm guessing, so that there's like a slight suggestion of atmospheric perspective. In the foreground, we have rose bushes with like the thorny rose bushes, and Maleficent's outfit and her raven Diablo are all in black. And so they're, it's a lot of contrast in the foreground. And if these trees had been done in black, they would have competed with that contrast. So to make them not black, but almost black, really does help the sense that they're further away, right? That depth. Just little touches like that I've been so thankful doing these replicants, because they've helped me in my own art practice, which actually brings me to a question. I didn't plan on asking this, but are any of you interested in me doing a video of like my own artwork? I've been thinking about doing that. I do share process on my Instagram, which is Art by Erin Green. I'll put a link in the description, but I don't know. What do you think? Should I do a video of my own art? Let me know. Doing the floor, I got out a ruler. Can you believe it? I'm actually using a ruler. But I at this point, okay, so I'm not giving myself a hard time. I've had a few viewers now tell me to stop being hard on myself, which, to be honest, I'm not really that hard on myself. At this point in my life, I'm pretty kind to myself, but I did screw up here. So my first mistake, and this is great, let's all learn from my mistakes. So my first mistake is that I only created 3 levels of the grid, whereas in the piece there's actually 4. Like I should have done 3 lines, pencil lines, instead of 2, but it's fine. That's not a big deal. But what I do think is the bigger mistake is that my squares get larger towards the right side of the composition. So I could have taken a little more time doing that, because once you've got the pencil lines down, you're pretty much hooped. Like, you can't erase those pencil lines. You can, but it's pretty tough to erase on a painted surface, especially when you're using acrylic, well, any painted surface really. So I would have had to repaint the whole floor if I wanted to do a better job on this this grid. What's this called? Checkered floor. Yeah, if I wanted to perfect it, I would have had to paint over it. So I just went for it, and it's fine. It's, again, you don't really notice it because the all the objects in the foreground, like Maleficent and the bird and all that, it does distract your eye from the imperfect sized grid, but that's something I could have taken my time with. And then the black here, I do a few coats, and there it is, done. And now I can do this little shit. Sorry, but Diablo, I love ravens, but Diablo is a brat. He's the guy that rats out Aurora, aka Sleeping Beauty, aka Briar Rose. He's flying through the forest. He's like out spying for Maleficent. He's trying to find Briar Rose because the fairies have, well, they've ferried her away to the forest to live in their cottage to protect her from Maleficent. But then the Raven, he spies on them and he sees that she lives there. So it's his fault. And well, you know what? You know whose fault this whole story actually originates with the parents, because they don't invite Maleficent to the christening of Aurora. So really, it's because they didn't invite they didn't invite the evil sorceress, the evil fairy. They should have invite evil people to your functions, because that way you will not have to deal with the fallout. That's the advice that this movie is really giving you. But speaking of Maleficent, now we're painting her, and this green was made by mixing yellow, black, and a little bit of cyan to give it some punch. And then I added some red and black to the mix, and a little bit more yellow to do this brown that the beak and the talon is painted in. And now we get to do her cloak. So this cloak is a very gray, sort of diminished mauve. And so I'm starting with the gray. And this is a technique that I've started doing over the last year or so, where I figure out how much gray is in a color. And I do that by opening up the image in Procreate, and then I can use my color dropper to check out the color and all its nuances, like how much red is in the color, how much green is in the color, and how much gray. And so I figured out how much gray is in this color, mixed up the gray, and then I added magenta, a tiny bit of true red, and I get this lovely mauve. I'm also aware of the fact that gouache dries darker, so it is slightly lighter than it looks like it should be, but it dries darker, and then after I do 3 coats, it is pretty spot on. And this was super fun to paint, because although like everything else, these are shapes, these are still basic shapes, which is a really wonderful way, especially when you're feeling intimidated by an object. Like for me, it's painting people or animals, but I just think of them as basic shapes. It's much easier. But in this case, these are shapes, but they have this fluidity to them. They have this painterly energy. And so I get to really accentuate the brush stroke. And I love that. I love doing that. I love when I have the opportunity to sort of, I don't know, paint more freely, especially when you're replicating someone else's work. It can feel very rigid, but in this case, these brush strokes here were a lot of fun. So you can sort of see that I'm flicking away and enjoying that process of painting. I mean, the whole thing is fun to paint, but yeah, these kind of details are my favorite. And look at that, another popped collar. In the last video, I talk about how I love a popped collar. So did Maleficent. And now, oh, this is the best. I have to say, I think Maleficent's outfit, the character design of this character is probably my favorite in all of Disney history. Her horned headpiece is so badass. It's so wicked, and the fact that she turns into a dragon and it becomes the dragon's horns, and it's very demonic. It's just so edgy for Disney, and especially, this was 1959, right? I don't know, it's just so cool. And I love it. I loved painting this piece. And yeah, it's a great costume. Maybe one year I'll try to do this costume. I did one year, one of my all-time favorite costumes was back in the 90s when I went to a rave. I'm trying to remember what it was called. I don't remember, but it was a good one. I think it was called E=Energy. But I dressed up as the character Lily from Legend, the movie with Tom Cruise and Tim Curry. Tim Curry plays this devil, Darkness, and he actually kind of looks like Maleficent. He has the same horns. And Lily, the character in it, she at one point sort of turns into his dark his dark queen, and she's got this super high collar, black collar, and amazing makeup. And my mom made me a costume, and it looked exactly like Lily from that movie, and it was so amazing. Wish I had that costume now. Okay, going back to the painting. Let's get back to it. Just finishing off her cloak. And I just noticed there, I did like an upstroke. I guess it's worth mentioning that do what feels right. With painting, I feel like a lot of the time we talk about, painting in specific directions, or there's a lot of room for, I think, doing what feels right. So if for you painting upwards feels right, then paint upwards. I mean, this does seem kind of silly to say, but I think it's important. I think it's important to know that if something works for you, go with it. And it's sort of like moving your canvas around when needed. Also paint in whatever direction feels right in that moment. Typically, I will paint like downwards so that I can get that nice end, like the flick of the end of a stroke. But anyway, now we're doing the stonework, these lines, which do not have to be perfect. I'm using the number 6, which has a really nice point to it. And I'm resting my hand on the canvas so that I can steady my hand, right? So that the line is somewhat straight. But again, perfection is not needed with this, especially because we have textures and other things that are drawing our eye away from that. But there is, like, I say this so often, but there's a nice energy to these lines. And if we tried to make them perfect, if we used a ruler, it would actually take away, I think, from the charm of this piece. And that's in general the rule with these replicants, is there's like a looseness to them that creates a nice charm and energy. And yeah, I mean, don't when like you meet someone and they're amazing and perfect, but like their imperfections actually make them even more perfect. You know what I mean, right? So I think that's the way we can think of these replicants, is that they were made so quickly. And there's that exciting sort of looseness, that imperfection in them that is charming, but also it's more approachable to paint these. I don't know. I feel like if they were super precise, I wouldn't be as inclined to try to replicate them. So yay for imperfections. Okay. We're almost at the point where we're going to be doing the rose bushes, that she conjured. She magicked them all over the castle. That sounded cute. Like she just magicked everywhere. Like, okay. But yeah, they're fun to do. So were these little, like the little divots in the stone, the little details that I'm doing here. I didn't really have to look too much at the original piece. I just kind of like wung it and let my brush do its thing. Another thing that I really love in painting is when you just kind of like turn your brain off and just allow things to kind of unfold as they will. And here we go with the thorny rose bushes, the rose bush tendrils is what I'm going to call them. And another opportunity to do those calligraphic lines, the thick to thin. Use them a number 6 brush. Loving this brush. It's perfect for these details. And I do recommend practicing when you do, anything really, like swatches are great, and then practicing that sponge technique for the texture is great. But with things like the trees and these tendrils, it's branches, I guess we can call it. But anyway, it's nice to do some practicing first so that you can get into a rhythm, because it really is, so much of it's about rhythm, because there's a lot of separate little parts to each branch, and each branch, you want them to be consistent. You want them to sort of look like each other, even though there's a variation within the theme, right? Or within that form. So, practicing is a good idea so that you can get a nice rhythm going. And I kind of reach that rhythm halfway through, and it's so satisfying just getting in there. And I usually start at the bottom of the branch, like the thicker part, and then work my way out to where it branches off smaller and smaller. Very cool. So while I'm doing this, I'll give a little bit of info about the movie. I mentioned earlier that it came out in 1959, but production actually started in 1950. So it almost took 10 years to make this animated film. And that's mostly because Eyvind's background. So he was in charge of doing all the backgrounds. He really was basically the aesthetic brain behind behind the movie. And his backgrounds, they were so detailed. There was so much going on, and they were so beautiful and highly stylized that the animators who were creating the characters and all the stuff going on in the foreground, they couldn't keep up. And the backgrounds had to sort of get less and less detailed over time. And it became this extremely laborious process that in the long run, Eyvind ended up leaving Disney before the production was even over. But it cost, I think it was $6 million, which at the time, like with inflation, that would be around 60 million today. And then it bombed at the box office. Very sadly, it didn't do well at all. Although it did get a lot of critical acclaim for the aesthetics and for the score. But yeah, it didn't do well. But over time, it's become a classic, and it actually, every year it seems to do better and better because people are catching on to just how gorgeous this movie is, especially Eyvind's contribution to the film. And yeah, I mean, if you haven't seen it, you should check it out. It's gorgeous. So here I use black for these details, which I regret doing this because the details were actually very, very dark gray. So again, they were very, very dark gray so that they didn't compete with the foreground. It's not a huge mistake. Like I'm not hating this, but they were dark gray for a reason. So if I had been just a little less lazy. Okay, speaking of lazy, actually, this is awesome. This face that I do is bananas. I'm so sorry, Maleficent, that I made you look like you're on some kind of something. You're on something. Oh my goodness. I'm sorry. It's so funny. But anyway, there she is, all done, celebrating 2025. Love 2024. And thank you so much for watching, everyone. Please like and subscribe if you haven't already. And have a lovely day. Watch Sleeping Beauty. Enjoy. And I'll see you all next time. Bye.